Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Good crack of noon to our friends on the East Coast. I'm Todd Obert, President and CEO of Productive. Joined alongside me here is Seth Geftick, Director of Product Marketing for Sophos, specifically for the Endpoint Security Group. And today, we're going to talk about understanding the Emotet threat and what's coming next. Emotet was hot on the radar. It was all over the mainstream news, kind of faded away, but didn't go away. And in fact, Seth's going to share with us why it is more relevant than ever and why ransomware continues to be a pain for all of us trying to keep environments secure. So if you have joined us in the past, you know how we do it. We like to meet productive in 1 minute or less, and then we like to get straight into it. So as I mentioned a little bit, here's the agenda of what Seth will be sharing with us. I'm going to talk about how these threats work, what's next for ransomware, ways that you can better protect yourself via endpoint, and kind of overall best practices to improve your security posture to minimize this risk. Because like I said, whether it's Emotet or something else, the bad guys are going to keep throwing stuff at our environments to try to find a gap to expose and exfiltrate, ask for money, ask for Bitcoin, all these different things. So with that, let's go ahead and meet Productive. Well, who is Productive Corporation? Well, I am so glad that you asked. Productive Corporation provides security solutions for mid-sized companies. We have tons of specialized expertise around security. We can answer technical as well as licensing questions. In addition, we implement, test, and optimize all the products that we sell. We can do a security assessment. We can review your AD security posture. We can help with configuration and implementation of anything that we sell. In addition to this, we produce a lot of content on security and products in the security marketplace. You can find all this on our YouTube channel, as well as at productivecorp.com/solving security. The bottom line is we have the resources to help you, whether it's licensing, technical help, implementation, any sort of optimization services, help with the publisher. We're here to help. Help at productivecorp.com is the best way to get a hold of us. So there you go. If you didn't get it, hopefully you do now. So like I said at the top of the hour today, we are here talking about Emotet and the next generation ransomware threats. The man with the plan who's going to be talking about that is Mr. Seth Geftick. Seth is at Sophos and runs the product marketing for the Endpoint Security Group, and I work with him quite frequently. We know that he has a love of popular music. As we were searching out the history of Bitcoin, he I came up in the search Billy Idol, and he thought I might be more of a Billy Joel guy. Turns out our musical tastes are more suited than we think. In any event, let's give a warm round of applause to Mr. Seth Geftick. Seth?
Thank you, appreciate that. You passed the ball to me. I'll go ahead and share my desktop.
Yep.
Yeah. Hopefully you can all see that well now. So, by the way, no insult to Billy Joel. I grew up in the New York area, so Billy Joel is required listening.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to. Yeah, I think we're good there.
Yeah, we're good. All right, but yeah, they're no hold steady. So, all right, so we're going to talk about Emotet today, and as Todd mentioned, Emotet. When we said let's put together a presentation for Productive, Emotet was like the number one, number two, and number three threat that we were dealing with. It's a form of ransomware. The Emotet group really started this huge shift from ransomware being more of a spray and pray approach, which is anybody and anyone was a target, to starting to finally target specific organizations. Emotet was really successful at it. They went away. They're a little bit back now, or at least maybe parts of the group are. But it doesn't really matter whether it's Emotet or some other name. The names have changed, but the game is still the same. which is now that ransomware has moved to this targeted approach, and the techniques developed by the Emotet group are still relevant and still wreaking havoc around the globe, unfortunately. So for those of you who've sat in on ransomware presentations, either from us or from someone else, you know that it's been a big topic for a while now, and you're wondering, why am I sitting through another ransomware presentation? It's because ransomware is not only not dead, it's just evolving and still with us. So this was back in April, end of April, like just a few months ago. CPO magazine was one of several that were saying, hey, there's like a spring renaissance. Ransomware is back. There's some very big ransomware victims out there. And that's actually, even since then, increased quite a bit. So one of the biggest globally from a few months ago was a company called Norsk Hydro. You may not know them, but they're one of the, if not the largest aluminum manufacturing in the world in Norway. And they had a ransomware attack that was similar to what happened to Merck a few years before that, whereas their entire network was destroyed essentially. When workers got to the office, they basically had to put signs saying, whatever you do, do not connect to the network because you will get hit with this ransomware. And they have public videos out there. They're very proud of their response and how they pulled together. But it's a good example of the destruction that it can cause. State and local level, the city of Baltimore has been dealing with a very high-profile ransomware attack where they could have paid a few $100,000 and theoretically solved it, but they didn't for obvious reasons. As a government, didn't want to pay criminals, and now it was weeks and weeks and weeks to the point where the governor of Maryland asked for declared it a federal emergency and asked for federal disaster recovery money in order for this. So. As of June, it was $18 million. It sort of faded out of the news as a top story. But if this is going to happen to Baltimore, it can happen to any city and local government. Certainly, we keep seeing it. Just last week, this is from Sophos News, but there was ransomware attacks, coordinated attacks in the state of Texas, where 22 different state and local agencies were hit with ransomware at pretty much the exact same time and fell victim to it. So bottom line here is ransomware is not dead, unfortunately, for all of us. It's just evolved and become much more targeted. So where in the past, attackers were really just looking for any victim they could find, the fire and forget or spray and pray approach, and try to spray to as many machines as possible. And the timing didn't matter. It didn't matter what really methods they used. WannaCry and NotPetya were the poster child of this. Now it's one victim at a time, much more manual, much more reconnaissance built in, and time for maximum impact. So looking at social pressure techniques in order to make people respond as quickly as possible, because obviously the ransomware authors and attackers are trying to get the ransom paid, right? They don't really care about what happens to your files or not. So a few of the big ones that have happened since then, BitPayment or SamSam, which I'll talk about briefly, and Dharma. But let's start with Emotet and then the methodology there, and we can go into what it's grown into. So Emotet, in fact, has been around for a while. 2014, we saw the first Emotet Trojan, which was a banking Trojan. And it was sort of just plucking along as your average Trojan attack for a while. And it wasn't until recently where you saw big shifts in Emotet and it started to become more destructive. And that's partly due to the tactics they use and partly due to the targeting that they use. And one of the things they've done is just morph quite a bit. And this has become a real problem. This is from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, where they actually said that infections are costing state and local governments about $1 million per incident to remediate. Again, that is not the cost to pay the attackers. This is the damage it's done to them and the cost to actually clean up that damage. And one of the reasons Emotet's not been caught at the same rate as previous ransomware attacks is because it's constantly changing, right? It's developed a motion path where payloads are constantly changing. They're using different techniques to the point where they have 300 different payload executables every single day that they're going around. So they went from a sort of an attack that would dip their toe in the water. Every few years, you'd see a new Emotet variant to putting it on hyperdrive. But their tactics and the story is relatively the same every time. Just like most attacks, starts with some sort of spam. So having phish threat or other type of employee training will always help reduce the attack surface here, but obviously won't completely eliminate it. So using old school social engineering, brand spoofing, whatever it is they can get to get that initial infection in an organization. At that point, they really can start doing their damage. They can spread across the network. One of their techniques they've used is to use your infrastructure to send spam to infect other organizations. So a nice little Christmas gift you can give your friends and family is not only you are a ransomware victim, but you get to spread it to other people in your email system. Then they actually download some more malware payloads. So those could be banking Trojans. Those can be the ransomware itself. They'll look at other email addresses and names and try to build a database there, again, for more distribution. They like to go in and not just it's not just a ransomware only attack. They'll look at browser history, usernames, passwords, any credentials they can suck up as part of the attack, they will do that. And then while all this is going on and the security team is panicking, then the targeted ransom comes and really drops a bomb on everyone. So it has not just a high impact, but also that secondary impact. It not only hurts you from a financial perspective and a data breach perspective, but also reputationally because it'll spread out beside your network, which is obviously not so great. So what makes it so dangerous? Well, first of all, it only takes one machine. One of the things that Emotet's good at is getting a foothold in the environment, again, using spam or something else like that, or social engineering. Then it spreads throughout the environment, constantly moves around in terms of its tactics.
Hey, Seth.
Yep.
Do you have any data on, is it more from spam? Is email the primary threat vector, or is there social engineering? Is that a significant percentage?
Email is the primary when it comes to almost all ransomware types.
Yeah.
So there are obviously other ways you can download ransomware. You can go to a malicious website. There's certainly, if someone was really targeting you, they could use an external device. But email, getting someone to click on a link or an open attachment, is still the easiest and least expensive and most effective way for attackers to distribute really any threat today.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they're still doing here. So even if only 1 out of 1,000 people in your company clicks, they don't care, because once they get that first person, then they use those other techniques to move laterally, escalate privileges, and really infect the entire network. And one of the fun things they do is once you go clean up a machine, it just keeps coming back. So unless you've gotten to the root source of why you were infected in the first place, Emotet doesn't really give you your files back and leave you alone. Either they'll make you pay and then just reinfect you again, or if you clean up a machine and put it back online, it'll just reinfect it again as well. Right, so it's pretty ruthless in that sense, and it does a significant amount of damage. So again, not just looking for one machine in an organization and trying to get ransomware from one victim, it's trying to spread and do as much damage to hit as many files and servers as possible. So how does it do this? So first it starts with obviously a cyber criminal. You can tell that the bad guy is the one in the red hoodie because he's wearing a hoodie, and therefore he's a bad guy. That's the way it works in cybersecurity marketing. So again, he has command and control servers, and he has his target. First, he uses some sort of email to infiltrate. Then once inside, then it'll call home for additional instructions to the command and control server. So pretty typical here. Then what's starting to do more damage is spreading to other systems in the network. So rather than just saying, oh, I got a victim, let me ransom them. Once it has its first victim, it doesn't ransom that person or that machine. It spreads to hit as many as possible. While it's doing that, it starts stealing those email addresses, username and passwords, sends spam to other organizations, both as a distraction and as a way to spread more of the ransomware. Then it drops the ransomware. Usually it's ransomware. Sometimes it's a banking Trojan. Sometimes it's both. Right. So a lot of damage. So from a defender's perspective, we want to have layers of security for really every single layer of this attack. So on the network side, on the endpoint side, on the email side as well. But mostly what I'll talk about today is very endpoint focused, because that's a very effective way to deal with ransomware. So a little bit more technical deep dive into what Emotet looks like. So again, user in this case from Outlook, would receive a malicious email. When they click on the attachment, so in this case, this specific root cause analysis, this is a threat case within Intercept X. So we just made it look like PowerPoint, but it's a real threat case. They opened up a Word document, which had malicious scripts enabled. Once the user enabled those macros, so you usually get that, hey, are you sure you want to enable these macros pop up? The user did. It launched a command prompt, which started not just executing malicious code, but obfuscated code, so you really couldn't tell what was going on there. Did that again, launched a second copy of command.exe, again for stealthiness, which then launched PowerShell, our good friend PowerShell, which is so often involved with not just ransomware attacks, but attacks on the endpoint. At that point, it then connects out to an IP address to download a new file, and this, in turn, for some reason, copies itself, again for stealthiness, and that's where the payload is, right? So in our case, we would detect that PowerShell connected to an IP address that we thought was suspicious, which then downloaded an exe, which was also suspicious because it had an unknown reputation, or because deep learning or perhaps a signature would have detected that executable is malicious in the first place and blocked it and says, oh, this goes all the way back to Outlook, this shouldn't happen, right? So multiple layers of defense involved there, but that's how you look at this different stages of this type of attack and think, well, obviously we want to just block 431.exe, and we're going to do that, but this attack is more than just the actual payload itself. It's all those other steps that led up to it. And part of a good defense in depth strategy is having different technologies to stop different parts of the attack chain. And hopefully that's illustrated pretty well here on why that's important, because attacks like Emotet aren't simple. They're much more complicated attacks. So I mentioned that Emotet was a very big group. Obviously, the Department of Homeland Security said is one of the biggest threats, around $1 million per incident. And what other attackers have realized is that they can copy what Emotet did and take it to the next level. So Matrix is one of them, where they went from automated attacks to more manual attacks of really, we call low-key targets. They're not just going after Fortune 500 companies or name brands you've heard of. They're going after specific targets that they think are vulnerable and would pay the ransom. And they do it via brute force. So RDP is a pretty common thing you'll see in these attacks, where someone took remote desktop protocol that's exposed to the internet that people didn't even realize was exposed and use that as their initial foot in the door. Once inside, spread through other parts of the network, then drop the ransomware note, basically saying, here's our email address, deal with us, or rebuild your entire network. So Matrix really wrote the book on this. We actually have a great report, sophos.com/matrix. You can read about that. MegaCortex is another one that built on that and actually built on top of Emotet itself. So I mentioned Emotet, the last step was dropping ransomware or a Trojan. Well, Emotet also is a distribution network where they can basically rent out their network for other types of attacks. So the MegaCortex group took advantage of this. Back in May, we started to see big, large-scale ransomware attacks from them using the Locker Goga ransomware. And the reason it's called MegaCortex is after the Matrix movie. It was a reference to the movie, and the researchers wrote it that way based on their lovely ransomware note, which I really enjoy, because not only will they offer to give you your files back, but they will guarantee that your company will never be inconvenienced by them again. And just to show you that they're really nice, as part of your payment, you don't get your files back, but you also receive a consultation on how to improve your company's cybersecurity. And you can see, we can only show you the door. You're the one who has to walk through it. That's the Matrix reference that helped give it.
That's beautiful.
I don't know if they're funny or just jerks or a little bit of both, but that's where that comes from. The other big group that came out recently is SamSam. So started been around for a while, but started to grow and grow in size. So now they're about $6 million that they've made, according to the latest research from Sophos Labs. And the key takeaway here, SamSam, is it's been really effective and pretty high profile, because they would have gone after healthcare, government, and education. They looked at those three targets as people with stereotypically weaker security defenses, a lot of sensitive data, and not really having their act together in terms of knowing what to do, and hoping they would panic and just pay the ransom rather than having a good disaster recovery plan here. That's why you've seen them in the news quite a bit, because a lot of the big newsworthy ransomware attacks, the ones that we actually hear about publicly, were from the SamSam group. And then on top of that, another one that's built off of the Emotet group is a new one called Ryuk. And this is my way of, they're our arch nemesis here at Sophos, right? I forgive the photo that Sophos Naked Security used there, pretty disturbing. So the twist that Ryuk has added to the mix is not in terms of what makes, I mean, the ransomware is sort of the technique of ransomwaring files is pretty similar. But what Ryuk has done is before doing anything, they check to see what antivirus is running and attempt to turn it off. And specifically, they are very focused on Sophos. They are not fans of us. So that's why we haven't put out a ton of Ryuk white papers and things like that in the news. We do have video demonstrations of us blocking it, but we really kind of don't want to egg them on and draw even more attention to them. Hopefully they'll move on to someone else. But again, one of the key takeaways, whether hopefully you're all using Sophos, make sure you have tamper protection turned on. It is a default setting, but that needs to be turned on because if not, Ryuk will see that and be able to disable the antivirus and endpoint protection, and then at that point, they can pretty much do whatever they want.
Yeah, it's kind of a riff off the old deal where they would basically, when you were trying to update your endpoint, right, they'd redirect you so that wouldn't actually update, like
Exactly.
a virus definition. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, we see that a lot. So we were just talking to our MTR group, our Managed Threat Response Service, and one of the things in an early beta test they were doing with an early access customer was they had what was apparently a legitimate software, like an embroidery software that they're running in their company.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that software has the ability to shut off the company's firewall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Type thing. And it's like, it wasn't malicious, but someone could take advantage and do something bad about it.
Yeah.
So attackers looking at the security and being able to turn it off is always something that they'd love to do because it's like complete distraction, right? Once that's off, the defender can't do much, and that's what Ryuk specializes in.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously tamper protection is important. What else can we do to stop targeted ransomware? So this goes beyond just installing Intercept X, which of course, you know, I work at Sophos is going to be a big recommendation, and I'll explain why in a minute. But beyond that, RDP, PowerShell, trying to lock down those as much as possible. Ransomware, targeted ransomware in particular, likes to leverage RDP in order to get into an environment. So make sure that that is something that you've looked at, who has the ability to access it, and make sure it's not exposed. Obviously, always patch, something that is general good advice for any type of defense. Also defense in depth, so don't just think of one technique. Like, so for example, we have CryptoGuard, our anti-ransomware technology in our product. That's amazing technology, but it's just one layer of defense. So just like Emotet has many stages of the attack, what's our defense for each of those stages? We need to think that through. I mentioned before, turn on tamper protection. And then of course, another good hygiene practice, look at user rights and assign those by need. And then in case the worst happens, make sure that you have files backed up offline, not connected to the network because they'll be infected too. And always have a disaster recovery plan. Know what you're going to do when something bad happens before it happens. Because when you're going through it, that's when bad decisions get made. All right, so with a little bit of time left, I'm going to go through specifically how Intercept X and the Sophos suite can stop targeted ransomware. So hopefully you've all seen this before. When it comes to Intercept X, we have what we call the power of the plus. That's multiple layers of security in a single product, in a single agent to stop a variety of attacks. So we still detect a lot of bad stuff, like 80% of bad stuff today that are known bad, stuff we've seen before using those old school foundational techniques, signatures, HIPs, device control, web application control, right? So things that say, if we know it's bad, we'll stop it. But the truth is, not all attacks are known, most are unknown. In fact, Sophos Labs every day sees 500,000 new variants of malware that we've never seen before. The biggest one there being ransomware. As I mentioned before, we have CryptoGuard. We also have something called WipeGuard in the product, which stops both file-based attacks and master boot record attacks. Those master boot record or wiper attacks are very destructive. That's what the Petya family of attacks were. So if we see malicious encryption happening on the disk, we'll stop it and roll back any affected files. Other types of non-ransomware behavior, or before the ransomware ever launches, we use deep learning. That's our, one of our biggest tools in our tool belt to stop any unknown executable. Essentially, we're looking at the DNA of a file and in about 20 milliseconds, extracting millions of attributes from that file, running it through our algorithm and determining, based on that DNA, does this look like something bad that we've seen before, even though we've never seen this file before, or does it look benign? And then for all those attacks that don't rely on an executable, the so-called fileless attacks or attacks that utilize exploits as part of the attack chain, we have bar none the most robust anti-exploit technology in the business. This isn't about the specific exploits, it's about the techniques used to take advantage of those exploits, of which there's about 24 different known exploit techniques that we block, right?
So
ideally, yep.
So when can you explain a little bit more on the, the rolling back and what kind of window that is and how that actually works? I think that's a pretty interesting feature of the product.
Exactly. Yeah, so the way it would work, so if we had multiple layers of defense, and let's say ransomware actually launched on a victim's machine, at that point, the ransomware is going to immediately start either encrypting the master boot record or, in most cases, encrypting files on the machine. Right, so we see, oh wow, this encryption's happening. This is unauthorized. This is malicious encryption, and we're going to stop that behavior right away. The problem with that is, the effects of ransomware immediately. So some files will have already been encrypted at that point. So what do we do about those? And what we have is patented technology that basically takes shadow copies of the file itself. And so as soon as that file is encrypted, we stop the ransomware. At that point, we isolate the machine for a few seconds and we roll back those files back to the original state. So that's a lot of, the long and the short of it is, from a user perspective, even if ransomware ran on the machine, a few seconds later, that ransomware would be stopped, the files will go back to normal, and the user can go back to business as usual, right?
Yeah,
so,
which is amazing.
Which is amazing, exactly. So what used to be hours and hours of remediation, having to take that machine offline, wipe it, rebuild it, it's essentially nipped in the bud and only a few seconds of distraction. Of course, whenever ransomware happens, we want to know what the root cause, like, did they click on an email? Where did it come from? Because we want to stop that attack chain to prevent it again.
Yeah.
But at that moment, the user is free to go back to work, right? And it's up to the IT and security teams to make a decision. So to give a ransomware specific example why layered defense is important, if I'm an attacker, the first thing I want to do if I want to hit you with ransomware is I got to deliver that to you, right? And usually attackers, in addition to using email, will actually deploy and install the ransomware itself using a series of vulnerabilities on the machine. So even if you click on a link or open an attachment, like that attachment's a Word document. Word is not inherently malicious, but it could take advantage of vulnerabilities in Word in order to distribute ransomware. Right, that's like enabling macros is a good example of that. So to stop that, we have both old school technology and web security, but that anti-exploit technology that I just mentioned, that's a new school or next gen technology that's looking at those techniques. So in examples of the big high profile WannaCry and NotPetya, they distributed ransomware using techniques stolen from the NSA, one called Double Pulsar, one called Eternal Blue. We see those types of techniques being used, we'd stop it, and we'd stop that attack before ransomware was ever delivered in the first place. If attackers still able to get by that layer of defense, the next thing they need to do is run the ransomware, right? And as defenders, we want to quarantine the file and not let it run in the first place. So of course, if we've seen that file before, we'll block it with a signature. That's pretty standard. But in a polymorphic sort of thing as Emotet, where the payload's constantly changing, deep learning will be a really effective layer here. We look at the DNA of that file and basically predict that it's ransomware and don't let it run. And that happens in milliseconds, so nothing gets encrypted. But if something does get encrypted, that's where CryptoGuard and WipeGuard come in, where we can actually stop that encryption, roll back the affected chain.
Cool.
Skip. So this has been effective. So third-party tests, you could listen to me, you could listen to third-party validation. 100% total accuracy, best total cost of ownership in, 100% total accuracy in several SE Labs tests for both small business and enterprise. We're actually going to get the Small Business Protection of the Year award in a few weeks. For MRG, #1 in malware protection, #1 in exploit protection. Actually, they just came out with a new 360 assessment last week. We blocked every single type of malware they threw at us, every single type of exploit attack, every type of PUA, including ransomware in that attack. Leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant just came out last week. Once again, a leader for the 11th year in a row. Forrester leader. NSS Labs #1 both for security effectiveness and total cost of ownership. So all the way in the upper right of their graph. And I can go on and on. AV Comparatives, PC Magazine. Point being here is when we say we have the world's best endpoint protection, we actually have third parties that agree with that rather than just trying to make up claims on our own.
Yeah.
Beyond endpoint protection, there's other layers of defense that help stop ransomware. On the network side, things like web and email protection, particularly since so much of ransomware comes in via those channels in the first place, so stopping it from ever, again, reaching the user in the first place. The Sandstorm sandboxing technology we have on the network side is very effective at making sure you don't have any malicious ransomware attached to anything coming over the network. And of course, intrusion prevention systems, particularly effective at stopping known bad websites from doing command and control and dropping instructions to the attacker. Of course, if you're a network and an endpoint customer together, you have the advantage of leveraging synchronized security. So in that case, the endpoint would see something happening, in this case, Emotet running or the type of ransomware. Of course, you would stop that on the endpoint. That's goal number one. But while you're doing that, it would tell the firewall, hey, these machines we've seen Emotet attempting to run. The firewall would shut down, isolate those machines while that's happening. So in case anything got through, it couldn't spread throughout the environment, couldn't spread to the outside world, right? So things like that spam feature of Emotet, right? So remember, before it ever dropped the ransomware, it tried to send spam to your email distribution list. Well, in this case, we would have that machine isolated because we knew something was going on there, automatically clean it up with an intercept X and then restore access. So a really classic automated incident response from synchronized security here, also effective versus ransomware.
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah, so with that, I know we're kind of butting up the end of time here, or slightly over. There are a bunch of resources that you can go to specifically on Emotet. We obviously, and Todd can send you a ton of information specifically on ransomware as well, if you want to learn more. But the bottom line here is that Emotet and other types of targeted ransomware are still giving the cybersecurity world, the IT world, trouble. They are constantly evolving their techniques, and having a layered defense like you see in Intercept X and you see with the broader synchronized security strategy is very effective at stopping these attackers, but we need to keep vigilant and know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Seth, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, this is great stuff. So we are recording, or did record this presentation. Your account exec's going to be able to send you that link. It's also going to be up on the productive content page on YouTube, as well as our website, productivecorp.com. And so I say thank you. Thanks for spending 30 minutes with us. And Seth, thank you for a very informative presentation. I sit in and hear a lot about this stuff, and I still think there was some great things to learn from this. I pick up a few things every time I hear you talk about threats and emerging threats. So great stuff. Thank you. And everybody else, let us know how we can help you, right? Keeping your security posture strong is something that is an ongoing effort, right? Just because you're strong today doesn't mean you'll be strong tomorrow. So we can talk to you about this. If you aren't running Central, we need to get you there. We need to talk about Intercept X, and we also need to talk about Sophos at the gateway. But for now, we're at the end of our time. So I'm Todd Obert from Productive, along with Seth Geftig from Sophos, wishing you a fantastic balance of your day and week, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Appreciate the time.